Thank you for joining us today. I'm Stephanie Hare, Senior Analyst for Western Europe here at Oxford Analytica, and I'm in conversation with my colleague Dr. Tom Wales, Deputy Director of Analysis and Chief North America Analyst, to discuss the nomination of Paul Ryan as the vice presidential candidate, along with Mitt Romney, who is running for President of the United States. Tom, what is behind Mitt Romney's decision to pick Paul Ryan?
Well, Mr. Ryan is the chairman of the House Budget Committee. He's the primary sort of intellectual and political force behind the Republican drive to shrink the size of the federal government. And this is really the intellectual framework for most of Ryan's ideas. He believes that the federal government should have a considerably smaller role in everything from entitlement policies. Those are things like Medicaid, that is government-sponsored health care for the poor, and Medicare, that is government-sponsored health care for seniors in the United States, to really the government's role in people's private lives. He thinks that that should also be significantly smaller. Now, the way he intends to achieve this is tends to be quite right-wing. But Ryan has proven to be actually a fairly good spokesperson for right-wing ideas. He represents a swing district in Wisconsin. It's actually pretty closely divided between the two parties. If you know a little bit about U.S. geography, his district is right in between, smashed in between the northern, the most far north Chicago suburbs and the Milwaukee suburbs. And so his personality is sort of emollient. He's kind of, he's approachable, and he puts these actually quite right-wing ideas over in an accessible way that has gone down well in his particular district.
Right, and he's also chairman of the House Budget Committee. So I guess my question for you would be, what do you think the impact is going to be of his nomination in terms of the politics? What are we going to be seeing over the next couple of months?
Well, in terms of the politics, the immediate effect has been relatively muted. Normally, there's about a 5-point bounce in the polls for the challenger after they name their vice presidential candidate. We haven't seen anything nearly that large for Ryan. But really, what we're talking about here is a strategic choice on the part of Romney. He chose Ryan to shift the conversation back to the economy and fiscal policy, which he perceives as his strengths, after a rather unfortunate foreign trip in which he made a bunch of comments that generated negative press. It didn't really hurt him very much in the polls. And he's also run into problems whenever the party has strayed onto social policy territory, because that tends to exacerbate its problems with women voters at the moment, which is the group that's really keeping the president ahead in most of the polls. It's a narrow lead, but it's there. So he thinks, that is, Romney thinks that over time the Ryan pick will help him just because it shifts the focus of the debate a bit.
Well, let's talk a bit more about that debate. What is the impact going to be with Ryan now on the ticket in terms of policy?
Well, I think, look, if Romney wins the election, the fact that Ryan is his running mate actually makes things considerably easier for the White House when it comes to things like negotiations over the fiscal cliff, although he may not be directly involved in that because the fiscal cliff actually occurs before the handover of power. That is, a bunch of tax increases and other fiscal consolidation is scheduled to happen on January 1, and the new president wouldn't take office until the end of January, so that has to be done in the lame duck Congress. But it certainly would facilitate discussions between the White House and the House Republican caucus, the conservative study group, Tea Party caucus people who tend not to actually trust Romney very much. They see him as too moderate. In Paul Ryan, though, he ends up with actually a really excellent sort of go-between, because Ryan will be seen as credible by the Republican base. That might make these particular lawmakers more willing to compromise with their Democratic counterparts over what was called last summer the fiscal grand bargain. That is a $4 trillion fiscal consolidation package that was nearly agreed between President Barack Obama and House Speaker John Boehner. So that sort of bodes well for the Romney team in policy terms. There are more problems when you get away from fiscal and economic policy and away from the initial negotiations over fiscal policy in terms of what happens to financial services reform, what happens to the President's Affordable Care Act, and really how a President Romney would choose to approach foreign policy, because neither one of them, actually very unusually, has much, if any, experience on foreign policy topics. So the policy implications are pretty significant.
Well, thank you very much for that. We look forward to seeing the coverage over the next weeks and months as it unfolds up until the election. And for that, we thank you, and we'll see you next week.